The movie begins in Gotham City, where we find Arthur Fleck in his company's office preparing for work. He's putting on makeup because he works as a party clown. As he watches his reflection in the mirror, he puts 2 fingers in his mouth and twists them up and down while a single tear runs down his cheek. Later, we see him on the street, dancing while promoting a shop with a sign. Suddenly, some kids run by and steal the sign. Arthur chases them through the city and finds them waiting in an alley. The kids smash the sign over his head, and, after he falls, they kick and punch him. After work, Arthur goes to see his therapist. He laughs briefly and comments on how tough things are getting. The therapist asks if he's been working on his journal. Arthur hands it to her, explaining he uses it both as a journal and a joke diary because he's pursuing a career in stand-up comedy. The therapist flips through the pages and finds an unsettling note. "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life." She gives the journal back and asks how he feels about these sessions. Arthur responds that he felt better when he was locked in the hospital, recalling how he used to bang his head against his room's door. He asks if his medication can be increased, but the therapist points out that he's already on 7 medications. Arthur replies that he doesn't want to feel bad anymore. After therapy, Arthur takes the bus. A child in front of him stares, so Arthur makes funny faces. But the child's mother scolds him. Arthur suddenly starts laughing uncontrollably, and when the mother gets upset, he hands her a card explaining his laughter is due to a neurological condition. After getting off the bus, Arthur stops by the pharmacy to pick up his medication before heading home. Inside his building, he checks the mailbox, then goes up to his apartment, where he lives with his mother, Penny Fleck. She asks if they've received any mail, and when Arthur says no, she wonders if Thomas Wayne, her former employer, is ignoring her letters. Arthur reminds her that Wayne is a busy man and encourages her to eat. After cutting up her food, he joins her on the bed to watch the Murray Franklin talk show together. Arthur daydreams and imagines himself in the audience of the show. The host notices him and asks him to stand up. Arthur introduces himself and talks about how he cares for his mother, which earns Franklin's respect. Franklin invites him on stage, and as the audience applauds, they share a warm hug. Back in reality, Arthur smiles at the fantasy. The next day at work, Arthur's body is covered in bruises. His co-worker Randall approaches him, and after hearing about the beating, gives Arthur a gun for protection. Another co-worker, Gary, interrupts to tell Arthur their boss wants to see him. Arthur goes to the office and is told there's been a complaint about him disappearing with a sign. Arthur explains it was stolen, but his boss doesn't believe him, insisting nobody would steal a sign. He says he'll deduct the cost from Arthur's paycheck and scolds him while Arthur remains silent, smiling. Afterward, Arthur goes outside and angrily kicks a trash can. Later that day, Arthur shares the elevator with his neighbor, Sophie Dumont, and her daughter. When the elevator stalls briefly, Sophie makes a gesture as if shooting herself in the head, commenting on how awful the building is. Arthur smiles and returns the gesture as they get off the elevator. Moments later, Arthur is bathing Penny. She keeps asking about the letters she's sent to Thomas Wayne, insisting he's a good man who wouldn't want them living like this. Arthur reassures her not to worry, promising his stand-up career will take off soon. Penny sarcastically remarks that comedians are supposed to be funny. That night, after putting his mother to bed, Arthur watches a movie and practices with his new gun. As a song plays on the TV, he dances, pretending to talk to a girl, but accidentally fires the gun, making a hole in the wall. His mother wakes up, asking about the noise, but Arthur tells her it's just a war movie on TV. The next day, Arthur follows Sophie around town and even onto public transport. That evening, he attends a stand-up comedy show to take notes, which he continues to work on when he returns home. He writes, The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. His writing is interrupted by the doorbell. It's Sophie, who asks if he's been following her. Arthur admits he has, and she jokingly asks if he was planning to rob her. He jokes back, saying he could do it now, and she laughs. Sophie tells him he's funny, and Arthur invites her to his stand-up show, which she accepts before leaving. The following day, Arthur is working as a clown at a hospital, entertaining children. During his act, his gun falls to the floor. He quickly picks it up and asks the kids to keep it a secret. That evening, Arthur's boss calls, furious about the incident. Arthur tries to explain the gun was just a prop, but his boss doesn't believe him, adding that Randall claimed Arthur tried to buy a gun from him last week. Arthur is fired, and in frustration, he slams his head against the glass of a phone booth. Afterward, Arthur takes the subway home. In the same car, 3 men in suits harass a young woman. When Arthur starts laughing uncontrollably, the woman leaves, and the men turn their attention to him, mocking him by singing, "Send in the clowns." They take his wig and bag, asking why he's laughing. When Arthur tries to explain and retrieve his things, they grab and punch him, throwing him to the ground and kicking him. But this time, Arthur fights back, pulling out his gun and shooting 2 of the men. The third man runs away and abandons the car when the subway stops at the station. Arthur follows him, and after they reach the stairs, he shoots him. As his ears start ringing, Arthur realizes what he's done and rushes out of the station, running through the streets and entering a park bathroom. There, after a moment of panic, he starts dancing. Moments later, Arthur returns to his apartment building, knocks on Sophie's door, and when she opens it, he goes inside and kisses her. The door closes behind them, implying they spend the night together. The next day, Arthur goes to his workplace to collect his belongings. He overhears his co-workers discussing the news of a clown shooting 3 men in the subway. Randall, hypocritically, tries to offer sympathy, which irritates Arthur. He reveals that it was Randall's gun used in the crime. Before leaving, Arthur punches the clock, causing it to fall and break. On his way out, he sees the "Don't forget to smile" sign and crosses out 2 words, transforming it into "Don't smile." Back in his apartment, Arthur takes his last few pills and joins his mother to watch TV. Thomas Wayne is on the news because the murdered men were employees at his company. When asked about the city's rising anti-rich sentiment, Wayne says he's considering running for mayor to address it. He adds that the murderer was likely wearing a clown mask because he was a coward who wanted to hide his face. A few days later, Arthur meets with his therapist again. He tries to tell her that he finally feels like he exists, that people are starting to notice him, but she interrupts to inform him that the government has cut their funding and this will be their last session. When he asks who will handle his medication, she has no answer other than an apology. Later that night, Arthur waits behind the scenes at a bar, preparing for his stand-up routine. Sophie is in the audience. When his time comes, he takes the stage, but starts laughing uncontrollably. When he finally manages to deliver some jokes from his notebook, they fall flat. After the show, he leaves the bar with Sophie. As they walk together, Arthur notices a newspaper headline about the subway murders, featuring a clown's face. This pleases him, especially when Sophie comments that the clown is a hero. He also sees someone wearing a clown mask, similar to the one in the papers. After dinner with Sophie, Arthur returns to his apartment, where his mother has fallen asleep in front of the TV. He wakes her up and sends her to bed. Before going to her room, she tells him she has written a new letter. Arthur reads it and discovers that he's Thomas Wayne's illegitimate son. Furious, he confronts his mother, who locks herself in the bathroom. She explains from inside that she and Wayne were in love. The next day, Arthur is reading the newspaper on the train and tears out a picture of the Waynes, saving it in his notebook. Later, He visits the Wayne mansion, where a young Bruce Wayne is playing in the garden. Arthur approaches the gate and performs a magic trick, but Bruce isn't impressed. After introducing himself, Arthur reaches through the gate and puts his fingers in Bruce's mouth to make him smile. They're interrupted by Alfred, who pushes Bruce aside and threatens to call the police. Arthur claims he's Penny's son and demands to see Wayne, but Alfred laughs, calling his mother delusional. Enraged, Arthur tries to choke Alfred, but stops when he sees Bruce. Later that evening, Arthur returns home to find paramedics taking his mother to the hospital. He joins them in the ambulance. Hours later, while waiting outside the hospital, two detectives approach him. They explain that they had been questioning Penny when she had the stroke, and now they want to talk to Arthur about the subway murders. He dismisses them, claiming his gun was just a prop, and returns to his mother's room, where Sophie is keeping him company. After Sophie leaves, Arthur watches TV. Back in his apartment, the TV news reports on protests with people wearing clown masks in response to Wayne's comments. Arthur decides to join the protests. During the chaos between police and protesters, he sneaks into the building where Wayne is attending a movie. Disguised in an employee uniform, Arthur follows Wayne into the bathroom and confronts him about Penny. Wayne denies the affair, insisting that Arthur was adopted and Penny was mentally ill. Arthur doesn't believe him and starts laughing. Wayne punches him before leaving. Arthur returns to his apartment and ignores a call from the police. Instead, he gets into the fridge and stays there for the night. The next day, he receives a call from the Franklin show, inviting him to appear as a guest. He eagerly accepts. Afterward, Arthur heads to Arkham State Hospital, where he asks for his mother's file. The clerk confirms that Penny was psychotic and abused her child, but refuses to give Arthur the file. Arthur steals it and reads it in hiding. The file confirms that he was adopted, and Penny had lied about Wayne. She had also allowed an abusive boyfriend to harm Arthur, which led to the boyfriend's arrest. Devastated, Arthur returns home and enters Sophie's apartment uninvited. Sophie is terrified and asks him to leave. In a flashback, it's revealed that all of Arthur's interactions with Sophie were delusions. The next day, while visiting Penny in the hospital, Arthur tells her his life is a comedy, not a tragedy, and suffocates her with a pillow. Later, Arthur prepares for his appearance on the Franklin show. He dyes his hair green, applies his clown makeup, and practices his lines. However, he's interrupted by a visit from Gary and Randall, who have heard about Penny's death. Arthur stabs Randall with scissors, killing him, but spares Gary, the only person who was kind to him. Arthur, now in a new suit, leaves for the Franklin show. The police spot him on the street and give chase, leading him into a subway filled with clown mask-wearing protesters. Arthur steals a mask from one of them, causing chaos. Amid the confusion, the police accidentally shoot a civilian, and the mob attacks the officers. Arthur uses the distraction to escape. Moments later, Arthur arrives at the studio. While waiting in the dressing room, Franklin visits him, asking for a clean show. Arthur agrees and requests to be introduced as Joker. When he's called to the stage, Arthur enters with a dance. After kissing another guest and reaffirming that his clown makeup isn't political, Arthur admits to being the subway killer. He delivers a speech about society's failure to help those in need and criticizes Franklin for exploiting him for laughs. Arthur then shoots Franklin on live TV. As the broadcast cuts off, Arthur is arrested and taken away in a police car. On the way, he sees the riots in the streets with people wearing clown masks. He admires the scene, calling it beautiful, when an ambulance crashes into the police car, knocking him unconscious. The rioters pull Arthur from the wreckage and place him on the car's hood. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the Waynes are leaving a theater when a protester confronts them and kills Thomas and Martha. Back on the streets, Arthur wakes up to find the crowd cheering for him. He stands on the hood of the car and dances for them. Noticing blood coming from his nose, he uses it to paint a larger smile on his face. Days later, Arthur is in Arkham State Hospital. When his therapist asks him what's so funny, he replies that she wouldn't get it. As the movie ends, Arthur is seen dancing down the hallway, leaving bloody footprints behind.